So let's get started with the featured presentation by John. John, the floor is all yours.
Okay. You can hear me fine?
I can hear you, and welcome back, my friend. Wonderful to have you back.
Nice to be here. Nice to see everybody as well. It's very appreciative for this opportunity to kick it back off. I'm glad that it is a relevant theme that we can all congregate around. Of course, I think it's very important. And that's actually kind of the nature of what I want to try to tackle today is why should we continually seek self-improvement? Why should we continually surpass ourselves? Why should we go through all this intellectual exertion and effort? Because if you think about it, that's a significantly harder path than just plateauing and just stagnating with our current set of knowledge at baseline, whether genetically or we just go through college, get our education, and then just drift and coast. First of all, laws of physics, we only can coast downhill. We can't coast uphill, of course. Object in motion tends to remain in motion. But also, I'm going to present an idea, which is actually, I've visualized an equation. I like mathematics, so I like to picture things in a mathematical format. I'm going to explain this equation here in 1 second, okay? So, but before that, realize that to live a meaningful life, to live a fulfilled life, to live a strong life, to live a life where we are in constant service, which, by the way, I titled my short presentation, The Measure of Man. Our measure is in service, in value to those that we love, that we care about, that we are responsible for. That starts with ourselves, and our domain of competence, our dominion extends beyond ourselves as we grow in competence and ability. Competence and ability are obviously products of continually challenging ourselves, continually growing. Once we stop actively learning and growing, the hourglass starts to run out until we will have nothing left to give to those we love, to those we care about, to those we are responsible for taking care of. Nietzsche has an idea where he says, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." So if we aren't deliberately seeking out information that is conducive to unfolding our highest potential, that takes into account all of our idiosyncrasies, all of our unique traits, our strengths, our abilities, whatever direction we're oriented towards, our passions, our inclinations, our innate biological or genetic advantages, all of those things as an equation, if we aren't deliberately choosing a pathway forward, we're under the assumption, which I think is a foolish assumption in my opinion, that the world is going to provide that for us. Statistically, that is crazy. That is ridiculous to check all of those boxes, to assume that the haphazard conversations that we have, to assume that the relationships that we pick up through proximity or through random chance encounters, or that we happen to meet somebody that goes to the same coffee shop as us and they become a primary influence in our life, and they're going to be a constructive influence to guide us toward where we have to go. I wouldn't leave that up to chance. It's very dangerous in my eyes, because you look at the statistical probability of all these things unfolding, and I think it's nearly impossible. But a lot of people, in my experience, and I've lived this way as well, tend to go that way because it's easier. So this brings me back to the equation part, where I want to visualize it in this format. So we have, just as a physical equation in mathematics, we have the bottom two variables here, and these are common denominators. So I'm going to start with the arrow that's pointing downward. What that is all of the enervating, weakening, attenuating phenomenon, all of the challenges. Now, that is innately intertwined in life, in existence. You can argue like these are existential axioms that are pulling us down. It could be betrayal from other people. It could be lies. It could be malevolence. It could be deceit. It could be evil. It could be ignorance. It can be losing someone. It could be getting sick yourself. It could be time. It could be old age. All of these things are innately tied to existence. That's not to elicit a pessimistic viewpoint. That's simply reality. We are to embrace those negative things too. There's also negative things that are within ourselves. Ignorance, ego that always wants to be right, doesn't want to learn. It could be, let's look at it more practical as well. Negativity that's pulling you down in the workplace, let's say, could be competition from other people in your workplace. It could be ignorance. It could be unwillingness to master your craft and study, and unwillingness to extend your service and provide more value and service to those that you care about. It's unwillingness to continually cultivate your skills, etc. Those are all of the things pulling you down, and that's only a fraction of them, of course. Now we have an arrow pulling to the side. It doesn't matter left or right, it's the side. What these are What this represents is, I would say, distractions. We are always prey to distractions, whether it be through mindless social media consumption, whether it be through culture, whether it be through celebrities, whether it be through watching movies and TV shows. Yes, exercise this in balance, of course, but those are always present. And like I mentioned before, I think it's dangerous to let the external world do your living for you. You can't delegate your own thinking, because that's extremely dangerous. Now, I mean, you can, but the outcomes are not going to be pleasant. And if you look at this, you can kind of substantiate this with statistics. You find studies that conclude, I believe it was 67% of people, this was a US study, self-report their lives as unhappy. I think it was 72% live paycheck to paycheck. You can compile these and accumulate all these statistics on top of each other. I think it's like 42% of people didn't read a book last year. You keep going with all this and you pick out the average person from a population, and it's safe to assume statistically that they might not be the random best influence for you. Can they be a great person? Absolutely. Should you be rude to them? No, you can still treat them with courtesy, with respect, all these things. But to let them be a profound influence in your life, I think that could be dangerous. I think that wouldn't be wise to do that. We should deliberately seek out. And that brings me to the variable in this equation. That is the up arrow. That is not what everybody has. Some people just only operate on the bottom and the equation. They operate with the negative because that's a common denominator. That all of us have that phenomenon in our life. All of us also have the distractions pulling us aside. Now, this variable on top, this is what I would say is our established ideal, our own end that's going to justify the means, because these things are painful. These things are frustrating. These things can cause us to be upset. So we have to have an end to justify the means, right? And this end is most effectively actualized when it's a product of our own creation. Okay, we have to sit down and ask ourselves what we want out of life. What direction do we want to orient ourselves in? And then what we do is we work deductively from that ideal. And when we establish that ideal, let's say in a practical sense, I write down every aspect of my life, my health, wealth, relationships, career, my hobbies, what I do in my free time. I get a crystal clear picture of the ideal version of myself, the best possible version of myself in the world. All I have to do is work deductively and look at some intermediary disciplines, intermediary goals, intermediary milestones, and that ensures me I'm on that direction. Also, additionally, I think the proportion to which we are clear on that ideal, it is equally as commensurate and equally as vivid the actions that we should take. And also it immediately gives us a filtration mechanism to navigate through the world so we don't fall prey to all of these distractions that are pulling us aside. So a practical example, if I have an ideal and I establish something, these are my personal lenses that I operate with when I receive information, by the way. If I'm receiving information, if I'm on social media, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, I can first ask myself, is this true or false? Okay. And is this an opinion or is this a fact? Furthermore, something can be a subjective fact, but my second lens, which I think is more important, is this relevant or irrelevant to me and my ideal? Okay. I can learn about things all the time, but like there's so much information. Shrikant talks about this all the time. There are millions and millions and millions and millions of books. You cannot waste your time reading every single book cover to cover. You have to selectively consume. You have to have some filtration mechanism because you'll get overwhelmed with all of the data, especially today in the age of information. We have literally all of recorded history on this iPhone accessible to me at any hour of the day. That's insane. So I have to have some sort of filtration mechanism to go through that. So my first lens is opinion or fact. My second lens is relevant or irrelevant. My third lens, I think this is the most important for me, is this constructive or is this destructive information? Is this empowering? Is this life promoting? Is this going to get me stronger, more competent, more able to provide value and service to myself and the people in my domain of competence and respect? Or is this going to promote nihilism? Is this going to promote pessimism? Is this going to promote weakness? Is it going to cultivate envy and resentment and bitterness for the world? Is it going to cultivate a victim mentality, right? So it can pass the two lenses. But I think the third and final lens is like, that's my ultimate, okay, if anything trickled through those first two, I'm going to shut this out right now if it's disempowering, if it's destructive. So that is my visual representation of why I should constantly grow, why I should constantly learn in life, because again, these are common denominators on the bottom. All of these forces are continually attacking us. I actually look at life through this lens as like a battle or a war, not to be like conflated with a pessimistic philosophy, but like these can be my opponents. And obviously your strength, your competence is measured against what you have overcome. Just like in physiology, if I walk, I don't know, 5,000 steps a day, that's not physiologically challenging. That's very comfortable for me. I'm not going to develop. Now, psychologically, I can stay in my comfort zone. A lot of people do. A lot of people just plateau. They only surround themselves with people they agree with. They don't read or attempt to interpret or decipher or understand anything outside of their comfort zone. They don't read anything confusing. They don't read any philosophy. They don't read anything that's going to challenge their perspectives or opposing viewpoints. They stay in this echo chamber, physiologically, physically, emotionally, and that doesn't lead to any growth. That's just letting you decay. It's submitting to these common denominators here if you don't establish this ideal. So this goes back to the quote, he who cannot obey himself. If you don't obey yourself, you will be commanded by these forces. These are always, always, always fighting at you. And to summarize, the mind does not remain idle. One of my favorite metaphors for visualizing the mind, visualizing thoughts, visualizing productivity and success and everything like that is, this is from James Allen in As a Man Thinketh. In the opening chapter, he says, a man's mind may be likened to a garden which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. Whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein and continue to produce their kind. So look at that practically speaking. Just as if I have a physical plot of land, if I what is it called? Mill it or moil it up, you dig all the nutrients up out of the dirt, you make it richly fertile, and you just leave it out there. You don't plant anything in it. What's going to happen? Is it going to stay just pure, immaculate dirt? Absolutely not. Weeds are going to see that, oh, fertile soil, boom. There's going to be seeds that are always trying to take root, and it's going to grow and it's going to proliferate more of its kind. So, and that is a result of neglect. So the mind works exactly the same way. You don't have any unused portion of your mind. There's no unused plot of land. It's always being used. Now, is it being used by these negative phenomena? Is it being used by gossip, by trivial discussions, by frivolous discussions? Is it being used by negativity, by evolutionary bias to focus on threats and everything going wrong? Or are you deliberately planting seeds? Are you planting your ideal and cultivating it day in, day out with discipline, with care? With Max was just saying this a minute ago, the grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. You have to realize that this is in your domain of competence. This is in your domain of control. It starts in your mind and then it proliferates out into your body, out into your actions throughout your daily activities, and then eventually outward as a ripple effect. So you might not think about it in that way, but through that extrapolation, through that butterfly effect, so to speak, every single individual changes the world, whether through their actions, but it can't be quantified. It's very difficult to trace. So I think we should always be focused on providing that ideal to ourselves and working deductively to find milestones that we can get there. And like I said, the measure of man is in his competence. His competence is a product of the seeds that he plants and he deliberately cultivates, so he can provide service to himself, so he can obey himself and not be commanded, and then he can also inspire, lead, encourage, and aggregate people toward a better future in the process. So that concludes one of my most profound ideas. Again, I will throw it up on the screen if you guys wanted to just jot it down really quickly. I like visualizing it this way. It's very helpful for me. So yeah, I will pass this on to Shrikant for moderation.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. And again, welcome back. I just love the diagram. I'm also a very visual person. It's a great way of putting it together. All right, folks. So now I'm going to welcome everybody to talk about one idea that they have found transformative in their lives. Okay, and we're going to all talk about, everybody's welcome to talk about the idea that they have found transformative. You get between 2 to 5 minutes to talk about it. So next up is going to be Mike, Max, Joe, Nader, Jyoti, Tauhid, and Cheryl. If you would like to put your idea on the table, go ahead and message me. All right, so let's start with, it's going to be Mike followed by Max. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, John. That was really terrific. What a great start. to the meetup. For me, in the learning process, I guess I could say I like to trisect the process. So let's say if I'm doing something for an hour tonight during this meetup, I try to create 3 segments. So this is the main body. Let's say this is a 2-hour meetup. I try when there's time available to spend 10 to 15 minutes prior to coming here and starting the meetup, called an anticipatory stage, where I keep notes here. So I just randomly open up my notebook and I'll read some things that I had written down. And the whole idea of that is just to get the mind not only recalling things that have come up here in the past, but to prime me for conversation, which we're not always ready to do. We're all so busy, you know, this information bombarding us. I'm out, I could be thinking about a million things, but I'm not really primed for conversation. So I think to do that, you have to get your ears tuned up. So if I read something that I wrote, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, it makes me stop and think about, well, why did I write that? And I'll give you a concrete example of what happened to me when I first opened the book. But just that process of stopping and thinking, I'm kind of silent. In my opinion, it's really priming me for a conversation, because if I just read the note and I don't really think about it, it's like, yeah, then I'm on to the next note. The same thing is going to happen to me when I'm here, because right now I'm just looking at all these individual boxes because we're virtual. But if I get myself into that prime state, then you all become a little bit more real, or as real as possible, being that we're virtual. So again, as John was speaking, for example, being that I had the 10 or 15 minutes to warm up, I think I absorbed what he had to say a lot better than had I just jumped onto the meetup and said to myself, okay, you know, yeah, I'm doing a meetup and I'm just now getting myself warmed up. But by the time that happens, he's already 10 minutes in. So stage 1 is give yourself 10 or 15 minutes or ample time to warm yourself up for whatever it is that you're doing. Stage 2 is obviously the meetup period, and do your best to stay as focused as possible during the time. And the third stage is a kind of debriefing period where immediately after, if you have the time, look at your notes. Immediately look at your notes, because if you don't and you go to sleep on it, how much of it is going to be there? And as John was mentioning, you want the garden to be fertile. There's a lot of neuroscience that goes about, you know, writing something down by hand. Does it make it stick? Just reviewing a note and thinking about something that you may have said, does it make it stick? I've experienced it in music and in martial arts and chess, where I've had the time to trisect my learning process. So what happened to me tonight, and I'll conclude with this, I randomly opened up the notebook. I saw something about Plato's Shadows, the allegory of the cave, which I was not familiar with when whatever meetup this was in, but underneath it was my own handwriting, The Danger in Dissection, which was about music. And I had wrote a personal note. I forgot who it was. I think it was Dave, who did a wonderful meetup here about breaking down music. I think we took a Mozart piece and broke it down in great detail. And I remembered struggling as a musician about, if I study music too carefully and kind of look at it like a reductionist and break it down into its individual components, for me as a musician, the music lost some beauty, because I was looking at it almost like an analyst or a scientist, as opposed to someone who wants to absorb the joy of the music. Had I not went into that preparatory phase, that 10 or 15 minutes, that whole experience would have been way out of my head. So just warming myself up made me look at my notes, reminded me of something in the past, got the wheels turning. And then when John started his presentation, I felt that I was present for what he had to say. So again, just trisect your learning, prep, the body of the meetup, and then some debriefing for whatever time you think is appropriate.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to kind of quickly make like a short comments on the ideas that are presented as a way of kind of emphasizing the ideas. So I really like what John called his idea, existentially prescriptive equation. And actually that idea is very similar to the core idea in Bhagavad Gita. He says in Bhagavad Gita, it holds that there are 3 things you can do. You can either go down, which is called the tamagun, where you are evading things, deliberately evading things, evading reality. Then you can go sideways. It's called rajagun. That means you're going through your habits. You're, what John likes to call living by proximity. You're just reacting to things. And that last one, going up, is called sattva gun. It means you're going towards the truth, the highest truth that you're capable of seeing. It is hard, but that's the way up. So it dovetails that. I like the three-part division in time that Mike talked about, preparation to kind of get things ready, then actual execution, and then doing the debrief where you're saying, so what are the lessons from it? What are the takeaways? So all the work that you're doing is organized to help you in the future. So fantastic presentations, folks. Let's keep it going. Next up is going to be Max, followed by Joe. Max, go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. Thanks so much. As I said, I think today I'll just review something that John highlighted to me. I think one of his catchphrases is looking deeper, not further, for beauty and meaning. I really think that that's something that's lost with society now, because you can see there's constant distractions, there's constant ads, there's constant pushes, and people trying to sell you something that's going to be further and away, and they're going to say like this thing is going to get you there. They once asked Rockefeller, who was the richest man in the world at the time, how much money is enough, and he said just a little bit more. And in that thing, that's where therein lies the paradox of choice. Therein lies that thing where you're never gonna get enough of things that you don't need. But what we can do, we can look deeper and we can look deeper and we can really try to extract meaning and purpose from the things that are in our vicinity. So for example, Henry David Thoreau said in Walden that he looked at these ants having a war and he compared them to the myrmidon, who is what was the name of Achilles' army in the Trojan War. There were red ants and there were black ants. The myrmidon, that translates to the ant men as well. So he said that war between these red ants and black ants was as exciting and as gripping to him as watching soldiers, human soldiers, fight. So he got so much meaning and excitement from that. And I took that and looked and kind of reflected that back into my own life and how much content was I wasting by trying to like constantly consume. Because as some of you may know, I've done this thing for the last 3 years where I try to read a book a week. And when you get into this mindset of reading a book a week, you get to think of where you're just trying to hit like a number, you're just trying to get to the next thing and the next thing, and then you don't take time to actually really look into or examine or tear apart or extrapolate the deeper meanings of what was authentic about that content that you've consumed, about the things that you've seen, and then you're missing a huge like opportunity because there is that paradox of choice, which is a human dilemma that we fall into. And it's just amazing how incredible a human being is. If you meet a person and you can just like forget about that, but like the chances of that person being born, I think it was like 1 in 400 trillion. So the things that person has seen, their specific perspective, the magic of their authenticity, if you could just look a little deeper, if you could put more effort into it, if you could like apply more, maybe probe more, there's just so much value in that. And there's so much value in our lives and we just waste it. We waste our whole day today looking ahead for tomorrow. And then we waste tomorrow looking back at yesterday. So it's like we're in this constant state where we're never actually present. And I think having that sense of mind and that mindfulness to be present, to look deeper, not look further, even in relationships, as I said before, the grass is not going to be greener on the other side. It's going to be greener where you water. It's going to be greener where you put that attention, where you put that sacrifice, where, as John said, where you put that effort and you plant those seeds and you really cultivate that garden. Voltaire said it at the end of the Candide. After all that long nonsense that they went through, he said, let us cultivate our garden. Because ultimately, you can go around to these other countries, you can have all these adventures, but if you don't cultivate your own garden, it's all meaningless. And I think that's a very simple message, but somehow it's completely overlooked and it's purposefully kind of by the media and for people, because you can't make money from people who are going to cultivate their own gardens. You need them to go to Walmart. You need them to buy the next. You need them to buy these new Nikes. You need them to buy this new weight loss program. You need them to look on Instagram. You need them to buy the new hair fashion or whatever have you. So there's nothing to be profited from a man who is listening to himself and who is looking deeper within himself. A man that's not gonna be looking outward for like, meaning. So I just think that was very transformative. And while I got the chance here, I would really like to extend my appreciation to John for, enlightening that to me and even pointing me towards that. And by the way, that book that I made reference to, that was another book that he references often. So I thought it was gonna be very boring to read, but I read it anyway, and it ended up being worth it. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Max. I mean, I really like your observation. I want to put it in the diagram of John. See, when you're looking for the next thing, when you're kind of looking around, you're basically going sideways. You're simply saying, what's next? What's next? What's next? And you're trying to just react to that. And your life is full of that. When you're saying you're going to go deep, that means you're saying, this is what is important to me. This is what really matters. And you're going to do the work for that. So that is going up. So it's like, so what you're saying is kind of, it's important to go up, not sideways, because the depth means going up. And, kind of looking sideways is basically just drifting. So beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Jeff. Folks, if you have topics you would like to talk about, go ahead and message me, and I'm going to sequence them so that it will be an interesting sequence. Joe, go right ahead.
So I didn't come prepared to speak this evening, but I did think of several of John's topics that he had talked about, and I wanted to at least bring up one of them. And I thought the flowers from Algernon was an excellent topic for him when he covered it for me personally. And for those of you that don't remember the story, it's a story of a child that has a very low IQ, that they figure out how to basically raise his IQ to where he's a genius. And then at certain points, he realizes he's going to go back down to having a very low IQ again. And there was a lot that had come out of it. And I'm just giving you the basis of the story. But one of the quotes, and I believe, John, you read this quote. If not, it was very close to it. It was the boy Charlie realized something. He said, intelligence is one of the greatest human gifts, but all too often a search for knowledge drives out the search for love. This is something else I've discovered for myself very recently. I present it to you as a hypothesis. Intelligence without the ability to give and receive affection leads to mental and moral breakdown, to neurosis, and possibly even psychosis. And I say that the mind absorbed and involved in itself as a self-centered end to the exclusion of human relationships can only lead to violence and pain. And the reason why I think that that's really important is on a number of levels. So I'll link it to two things that we've talked about here in the past, this idea of Louis Sullivan's the inverted self, when you're actually looking internally versus looking externally. But there's something actually much more important than that, that I would like to talk to, is that, yes, we all want to be competent, we want to be intelligent and things along those lines, but we have to understand who we are at our core and what our values are, because our values will allow us to move forward intentionally. So this is something that we, when we discussed during the design way, is that when you look and say, okay, this is what is important to me. And I have to then, this comes back to stating the ideal that John was just talking about, that you state your ideal self, and then you can start to move forward intentionally. So the idea that sometimes people have just to get smarter or to just do something because society may be telling them to do it. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go do these things because society tells me to do it. And then you're just drifting. You may be drifting at a very high level, but you're not moving forward with intention. And this is something that's kind of important to when you think about self-improvement and we look back in our lives, that I know that I've reassessed my life and I just said, boy, I wish I had not been externally influenced and that I had basically charted my own path. And it may not have included, college or things along those lines. So in looking back, and part of that was that maybe I didn't do that internal work that we've talked about here that's so important. So that's really where I find that with this story, it was a lack of values, of understanding the values of why intelligence was important in the first place. There's nothing wrong that intelligence is the value, but it has to come with something else. And it has to come with the ability to give and receive affection. And that's something so far, so much deeper. And then that's the introspective work that we have to do in order to kind of decide what actions we want to take. And then we can set up our goals and we can do all the other things necessary from that. So yeah, and when they, that it says to and when the mind is absorbed and involved in itself and a self-centered end to the exclusion of human relationships can only lead to violence and pain. The violence and pain is on yourself. And that's really sad. So self-improvement, identify your values. And I think that if Charlie had done that early on, he would have realized that intelligence is a part of the solution, not the solution in and of itself. Anyway.
Wonderful.
So thank you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. John, you've had so much impact after all, even though you've not been here for some time, whatever you said has had so much impact. Wonderful.
It wasn't, I was just the medium for the ideas. The ideas are impactful. I was the channel, but either way, I'm grateful to bring them to you guys. Wonderful.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Jeff, Nader, Jyoti M, Tauhid, and Cheryl. Jeff, go ahead.
Hey, John, it's great to see you. So beautifully provocative as always. I actually want to add something to what you said there, and which was wonderfully. Thank you for arranging this, Shrikant, a wonderful invitation in Joe's point. So, John, in the top of your equation there is the focus on, as you put it, the authentic individual, and the authentic individual then in some relationship with others, with one's spheres, however you might think of those. And Joe, your point about that misery and values are related to our interactions with others. I want to read from a book here, just a quick point called Conversational Intelligence by an author named Judith E. Glaser, and I'll put that in the chat. Conversational intelligence is probably the richest guide I have ever read to having interactions with others that are meaningful, and you'll see here in the thing I have to read. And in this very difficult week, we may all need to listen to this. What is conversational intelligence? In working with hundreds of organizations and tens of thousands of people in many of the nation's largest organizations over the last 30 years, I've discovered that a lack of conversational intelligence is at the root of breakdowns in many relationships. Simply put, conversational intelligence is essential to an organization's ability to create shared meaning about what needs to be accomplished and why, so that people get excited and are clear about the future that they are helping to create together. Conversational intelligence will enable you to discern the types of conversations that are suited for different situations. At one end of the continuum are conversations that allow us to transact business, share information with one another, which I call level one. As we move across the continuum, we engage in positional conversations those in which we have a strong voice and point of view, and work to influence others to understand or accept our view of the world. These are level 2 conversations, which I think are remarkably common. As we reach the highest level, which I call level 3, we are communicating with others to transform and shape reality together. A powerful type I refer to as co-creating conversations. Co-creating conversations are the highest form of conversation. They let us not only advance our conversations with others, I believe they are actually writing a new DNA that can be passed along to the next generation. Co-creation is a set of skills and a complementary mindset that enable you to have extraordinary, transformational conversations with others. And it's that mutuality, John, that I think characterizes your very last point there, that there is a mutuality of interaction with each other in a co-creating relationship that comes from our own authenticity and identities and virtues, as Joe was presenting there. And it is an essential part of that beautiful formula. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. I really love that. I like the idea of kind of co-creation. I mean, that's what we are doing here at the meetups. And this particular meetup, this particular format is designed specifically for that. You know, each of us is trying to improve ourselves. And each of us is, you know, has our own take on it. So what this does, we are actually putting our ideas down. It's a structured conversation. So many people can put so many ideas down. And then we're going to be able to talk about it, and we're going to be able to see relationships between ideas and get all of it. So beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is going to be Nader, followed by Jyoti M. Nader, go ahead.
I apologize. I need to skip because I did not.
No problem. Next up is going to be, if you want to do it later on, just go ahead and type ! And you're welcome to do that. Next up is Jyoti.
Hello all. I didn't come prepared to talk today. I was going to listen to everyone, but I kind of got roped into it today. So I'm going to speak about spirituality. Why did I choose spirituality when she can't ask me, no, just talk about one thing. And why did I choose spirituality? That is on top of my list, because I think if I didn't have the spirituality, I wouldn't have worked on myself and I wouldn't have transformed myself. To give you a little background, I came from India, quite educated from Indian standards, very confident, and arranged marriage, not knowing my husband, not knowing the culture, not knowing the work field, nothing. So, but I was very confident. And there's one trait I had to get along very well with people. And it didn't matter who the people were, white, black, yellow, green, whatever. I just knew how to get along. That had always been my trait. So how did I start becoming very fearful and anxious? This is a young woman who knew her path. I had educated myself. I knew where I was going. And I started to lose myself. I started to lose because I realized that I was trying very hard to please everyone, trying to prove myself. And in bargain, I started to not know myself. I had identity, everything, but where was it? So, and then on top of that, I had so many mishaps in my life. So I had one thing that was ingrained in me. That was, like Joe said, values. Intelligent person should also have values. And that's what I had. And with those values, I started to resort to the supreme. I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe in higher powers. And that's when my higher powers started to help me. And that's what I call spirituality, because I started to become anchored. I was centered and I knew what I was. I didn't have to prove myself to anybody, but that does not mean I didn't have to be nice to everybody. I was coming in contact with people who had different set of values than mine, and I had to recognize them. They did not recognize my values, but it was my part to recognize their values and then take them in. And because I was in America, I was not in India. So I had to take some of them, some of mine, and then stay anchored. Now I find myself with all the mishaps I have had in life, I'm not shaken up. My fears, my anxieties have gradually left me. I don't watch the news in the morning. I do my prayers and my meditation because that's what tones me up for the rest of the day. And when I do hear the news, I'm not so fearful. So I would choose spirituality any day, every day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. In the Indian tradition, the spirituality basically consists of focusing on your core, the core of your being. And that is tremendously rejuvenating. So I think that, the simple idea of just saying, okay, let me focus on the core of your being, because that's where you can rebuild. It allows you to get away from anything that you have gotten kind of involved in and step back and look at things at the deepest level. So thank you very much, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Tawhid, followed by Cheryl. If anybody else wants to share, they're welcome to type an exclamation mark and just go ahead and tell me what idea you would like to share, and you can go right ahead. Tawhid, go ahead.
Thanks, Vikram. So the idea that resonated with me came from a book by Anne Scott Peck. The title is The Road Less Traveled. So I was reading the book possibly last year during this time, and but a little bit about me, like I think I'm personally a very anxious person, trying to do a lot, trying to solve a lot of problems here and there, and trying to pick up new hobbies and moving to the next one. So, but when I read the chapter, it kind of resonated with me very well. So the title is called The Problem Solving and Time. So the background story is the author was taking a walk in his neighborhood, and he saw one of his neighbor was fixing his car. And then he stopped and told his neighbor that I'll never travel myself to do that kind of repair by myself. And his neighbor's response was, just because you don't take time for it, like you don't have time for it, or you don't want to spend time on it. And then the author reflected back that that's true for almost every situation in his life. Every single situation he's dealing with, basically he's possibly getting anxious because he is thinking that time is short. That time is always short for him. So possibly he's trying to like basically he's getting anxious. So the bottom line is we always have time. Every time we see a problem, we get anxious. Our first thought is we have to solve it quickly, but honestly, we don't have to. So I guess by rushing to solve things, we kind of skip the opportunity to really understand the problem. And so this one of the things I was kind of take away from that chapter of that book. And that's something I also apply to my day-to-day things at work. Let me repeat the title again. It's called Problem Solving and Time. And the way you make your peace with time is also what I think his name is Mike mentioned, which is basically the term he used, which is called anticipatory stage. So basically, before you solve a problem, we have to be comfortable with that. So first we have to get into that comfort zone, prepare ourselves, and then by assuming that we have time in our hand to solve the problem, we pick the problem and look at the problem, considering that we have a universal amount of time in our hand. So that's the one thing, my takeaway.
Wonderful, Tawhid. Thank you very much. We had a presentation by Mark Stallman about being an autodidact, and he had 3 suggestions. One is to look for forms, we look for patterns. The second was to focus on the ground, not the figure. And the third one was take your time, because what if you put it all together, what it means is that we are mostly focused on figures. It's very easy to be focused on figures. So figure and ground means the base of what is really going on. Figure is whatever it is that you are habitually focused on. What this allows you to do is to kind of take the time to see what is the larger pattern of life, larger things that are shaping what your life is. So wonderful, thank you. Next up is, and Max, it's wonderful to have you participate from down under, and it's glad you could make it. And I know it was because John was here that you made it. Normally,
no, it's because of you, Shukran. If I see Shukran, I jump in the meeting ASAP. It popped up on my computer.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Max. Have a nice day. Next up is going to be, let's see, give me just a second here. I lost track. Next up is going to be Cheryl, followed by Gretchen. Cheryl.
Okay, so given that I want to keep this kind of short and not give you like all my ideas in one day.
No, you can just talk about one idea, because we'll be doing.
That's what I want to do. I just want to talk about one, because I basically use the same method that I'm sure a lot of people use that I don't think really gets enough attention. But I think about the time where I really put all my effort and energy into wanting to do more about my weight, and I focused on diet and exercise, and I had all kinds of magazine subscriptions, and I would get email newsletters throughout the day from many different places. And I focused, where your attention goes is where things happen. So I was very successful doing that. But I was also kind of the workaholic type, and throughout my career as a workaholic, and was never one for conversations, social conversations at work. At work, I talked about work, and then I never had time for extracurricular activities during the week, because at night I was on calls with offshore. So what I found in the last couple of years is the beauty of drifting. I know I'm going against what everybody's saying about drifting, but I found that when I took the gas off, driving myself down the same roads that I was always driving down, and I took the blinders off, and I started to pay attention and say yes to things that were offered that I never did before, and the different ways that they came to me, I found that there was a lot more to talk about and think about that I'd never pursued before. And I think that's one of the advantages sometimes of drifting, is the creativeness and the inspiration, and where you find more motivation and where you find values that you didn't know you had and interests that you didn't know you had. It doesn't have to become like a way of life. I don't think you want to let it run amok and take over where it shouldn't. But I do think there's a certain advantage to being open and remaining open to constantly learning new things. So I just think that's one of the advantages of drifting. And one of the ways I did that was, you think you're all alone in the world sometimes, and you have no idea what's going on. So I tapped into some spiritual motivations that pop up on my phone every once in a while that just remind me that You're not alone in the world. Somebody's watching, like somebody just sent you a message, a random message, because who's ever listening to my phone heard me say something and sent me a message. So that's all I want to say, just the advantages of somewhat drifting and taking off the blinders.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl.
With linguistics and somatic work and emotional work and intellectual work. So what I discovered was that, and I'll just, let me do a little demonstration that might be better. So if everyone would just touch their heads, and all of a sudden you'll realize that, hey, you know what? Your thinking space isn't all that big. Your head isn't all that big. It's actually pretty small. So we tend to do a lot of intellectual work, which goes all into why does this exist? Why this? Why that? And then if everybody would just kind of feel their feet, like, you know, feel the bottom of their soles, move their toes a little. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a sec, where am I? That you feel your grounding. And if it's not on the earth, if you're lying down, if you're standing, and let's see, what is the other one I can do that's pretty easy? So for emotion, I would say just touch your heart and feel your heart beating, you know, a little left to your chest, and you can just feel it for a second, your heartbeat. So that heartbeat is carrying a lot of your emotionals, a lot of your emotions. And then if you, gosh, how could you experience spirit? One way to experience spirit is just stop for a second and feel your breath. Is your inhale longer than your exhale? Are you going super fast? How long does it take? That kind of just exploration, not even moving it, but just feeling where it is. So through these 4 exercises, what I wanted to show people is that your intellect, your mind, your emotions, your body, what is showing, the tensions that are showing up, where your trauma is held, and your spirit, which is very much controlled by your breathing. How are you breathing? And a lot of, you know, yoga, meditation, everything concentrates a lot on breathing. Like all these 4 aspects are very much connected and will show up in the way that, you know, mostly people neglect the body. They will show up very clearly in the way that you move, all these different parts of you. So there are many things between that, you know, anxiety, emotion-wise, I would say anger, just one example, spirituality, I would say like lack of morals, that can be worked on or influenced by what you do with your body. So I thought that was a little bit adding to what other people had said. Okay,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Really appreciate that.